All right, so if you see up here, it's week 2 of what we're calling the 5 views of the cross. Now, we're not specifically looking at 5 different ideas of what the cross represented. What we're doing is we're looking at 5 different places where the cross is mentioned, and we're studying what all that means. Last week, if you weren't with us, we were in Luke chapter 9. We looked at Peter's confession. Peter finally, this great, glorious moment, he says, you are the Christ, the Son of God, the Messiah. And you'd think all these balloons and confetti would go off, and Jesus would be like, oh my goodness, I love you. But what happened is he started telling them what the cost of it would be to follow him. Jesus predicts his own death. He says, I'm going to die. And then he goes on to say, and your responsibility is to carry your cross daily. And what we were talking about that represented is that represents the death that we deserve. And the sacrifice that ultimately Jesus would have to make. Our saying last week was, the cross reminds us of our place in his plan. So the cross reminds us that we are God, that we don't deserve life, that we deserve death, that we are sinful, and that only by the grace and the love of Jesus is that cross on our back not our burden anymore. So that was last week. Today we're going to be looking at a different view of the cross. But first, a little trivia. So if you can't read that, it says, which one of these images is not associated with Jesus? So you got A, which is a vine, B, a light, C, a sword, and D, a cloud. Any guesses? Just shout it out. You're not going to get any points. But
C.
C? Okay. What else? Anybody else have any guesses? So I'll repeat them. A is a vine, B is a light, C is a sword, and D is a cloud. Which one of these images does not come with the association of Jesus? So John said C. Any other guesses?
D.
D, okay. A or B? Do we got an A or B in the crowd?
I'll go A.
Okay, we got an A. Anybody B? Nobody? Okay, well, I'll go B then, I guess. So which one of these is not associated with Jesus? D, it's a cloud. Now, if you're thinking, that might cause you to squirm a little bit. What? So you're telling me a sword is associated with Jesus and a cloud isn't? You might be familiar with the cloud that led the Israelites out of Egypt. But that's really associated with God, the Father. You might be thinking about a cloud on high, but still doesn't really represent the stories we have of Jesus. The vine and the light, those are 2 prominent stories in the Bible of life. But a sword, that's interesting. Not necessarily something you would think about, but today's passage, Matthew chapter 10, verses 34 through 39, we're going to talk about that awkward thing, Jesus and a sword. So Matthew chapter 10, verses 34 through 39. So we're in a similar situation of what we were last week. But this time, Jesus has started to send his disciples away on basically a mission trip, the first really mission trip. And as he sends them out, he starts preparing them for what is to come. He starts giving them a little bit more basis on where to go, who to talk to, and the purpose of all of this. And if you read the chapter up to verse 34, you'll see a couple different things that Jesus warns about or Jesus tells them to do. But when we get to verse 39, we get to a verse that can kind of make Christians, especially right now, squirm. And we'll see exactly what that means. So Matthew chapter 10, verses 34 through 39. If you're there, you can follow along. If not, you can just listen to me read it. But verse 34 says, do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a person's enemies will be those of his own household. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. That's an interesting story. Because you think, we sing the songs about peace on earth, every Christmas. Peace on earth and mercy triumph. When we think about that, we think, Jesus is how we get everyone unified. And that's the goal, but Jesus makes a very stark contrast. You see, these disciples, these apostles were about to go out and spread the news of who he is. And he makes a very distinct point to them. He says, I did not come to give peace to everyone on earth. But so often in America especially, don't really see this a lot overseas necessarily in Christianity, but in American Christianity, this is not a lot of times what we practice. So, Jesus, he's just peace to everyone. And what it turns into is this idea of universalism. Is that everyone's saved. Jesus, he loves everyone enough so that no one's actually going to hell. No one's actually going to perish. God loves you. Jesus loves you. Nothing is actually going to happen to you. You start falling into this trap, but Jesus said, that's not what I'm saying at all. Jesus said, matter of fact, the opposite. This might make you start questioning what Jesus' purpose was all about. When we think of sword, we think of killing, we think of death, we think of a tyrant, we think of a king, we think of an army who overtakes the less powerful. A man who overtakes the weak. Now, is that Jesus in the Bible? It's a lot easier to say that Jesus represents something like a cloud, but when you start talking to someone, you say, one of the things that Jesus says, his ministry, his gospel is like a sword. That's not going to go over well with a lot of Christians now. It's not especially going to go over a lot of non-believers. Because a lot of non-believers, they're okay as long as you don't push on their faith, as long as you leave it open for other possibilities beside Jesus. But Jesus said, that's not what I'm talking about. He said, matter of fact, within your own families, there will be division. Father and son will be at odds. Mother and daughter will be at odds. Mother-in-law, daughter-in-law, they will be at odds. And it can be difficult sometimes to think about this. I remember reading through the story in Matthew. Obviously, was one of the first books I read as a Christian. As I read this, I kept going because I was like, don't know what that means. Don't want to think about that right now. I'm new to Christianity. I just want to learn about who Jesus is. I don't really want to think of him as a tyrant right now. But as I went back and I looked at it, I said, I got to answer this question. Why is it here? Why does Jesus say his ministry is like a sword? And why does it say that we have to be at odds with everyone around us? Now, to be there, he doesn't say we have to be at odds with everyone. He says that the result of Christianity causes odds between family. Now, raise your hand in here if you're related to at least one other person in this building right now. Okay, most of us. So most of us are related to someone in this building. Where we're at right around here, family is very important. There's a lot of ties, and family ties are strong. A lot of this church congregation was built upon families coming together. Whole families coming to church, and a lot of us, well, not myself included, some of you guys are still here because your mom or your dad brought you here, or they worshipped here. And family can be really tight around where we're from, but Jesus said, I came to bring a divide between you guys. And that is kind of worrisome sometimes because we don't really like to make family mad. The whole point of family is to rejoice. I'm getting ready to go celebrate my Nana's birthday. She's very young if she's watching this. I won't say her age. But I can't wait. I've been waiting for hot dogs and hamburgers. Celebrating family is fun. It's always exciting to get together. But then Jesus says this thing about families being at odds. It's not something that we like to think about around here because, a lot of my family, they don't go to church, they don't really understand who Jesus is, and I don't want to just put a sword between us. I want to reach out, I want to show love, I want to show them compassion. But what does all this mean then? That was verses 34 through 36, and he sets up this idea of a sword. And we'll see later on a little bit what all this means. But then verse 37, we get the first of two claims that say we're not worthy. So the first thing, verse 37, if you can't see that up there, it says, whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Now this is another hard statement that Jesus gives. If you got family, you understand the love that family has for each other. You understand the things that family does for each other. And you understand if someone's lost, if they lose their life, the mourning that families go through, because they love each other. But Jesus says, if you love your son, your daughter, if you love anyone in your family more than me, you are not worthy. Man, it's interesting. It's another interesting statement that it's difficult to understand. It's difficult to comprehend. It's simple, but if you ever think, if you've ever seen the love that a father or a mother has given to their child, you understand the amount of love that it takes. For goodness gracious, the Father and the Son shows the love between the Trinity. Because that love is so strong. But Jesus says, if you love anyone in your family more than me, you are not worthy. If you love your father or your mother, your son or your daughter, your sibling more than me. It can be difficult sometimes to think about the love you have for Jesus because it's not as easy as seeing your brother or your sister or taking care of your children or growing up with your parents. That's a love that you see each and every day. It's a love that you grow. But Jesus says, if that's all you have, if you would do more for your siblings than you would for me, it says you're not worthy. Verse 38, he gives us another statement. He says, and whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy. Now, if you guys were here last week, you realize this was the focus point of last week's point. It's all about carrying your cross. It's all about understanding that death and destruction that we deserve. We see Jesus makes a very strict point to the lesson we made last week. You remember the lesson is that the cross represents our place in his plan. It puts us in the perspective we should be. So when Jesus says, if you're not doing this, if you're not carrying your cross daily, if you're not understanding that part of my plan, you're not worthy. And once again, it can be kind of something that's hard to deal with because we don't necessarily carry our cross every day. If you did, that would probably be a burden, and you'd probably have to have a truck or something. But for us, it's metaphor. It's a metaphor. We can't literally carry our cross every day. So it's, once again, that connection of tangibility, of being able to see something, interact with something that's lost. And it can be easy to forget about it. But that's not the very end. He gives us what it does take to be worthy. In verse 39 it says, whoever finds his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Christians have this bad habit in America of trivializing passages like this. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes should not perish but have eternal life. It's something John 3:16 we always learn. For whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. It's another thing that we teach children. But often when we teach those children's stories and those Bible verses to memorize, we forget the point of it. Think about what we were just talking about. He says, you're not worthy if you love someone on earth more than me. He says, you do not love me if you do not remember the plan that is there. So his statement is, the thing you're supposed to be doing is losing your life. Now this might mean by death. That's the pretty obvious explanation. If you lose your life, that means you've died. You are no longer living. But it goes a little bit beyond that. Whoever finds his life will lose it. Think about that statement. Think about the contradictory nature of it. Whoever finds his life will lose it. You would think whoever loses his life would not find it because it's lost. But Jesus said, whoever finds his life will lose it. And whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. So what does it all mean? What does this story mean? What is Jesus trying to say? He talks about the sword and how it is, in our families, that he came to bring separation, not universal peace. He said that if you love father or son more than me, you're not worthy. He said, if you don't carry your cross every day, you're not worthy. But he says, if you lose your life for my sake, you will find it. What this means is the cross causes change. By definition, by what it is in this section, the cross must cause change. How many of you, before you knew Christ, loved your family? I mean, I guess you don't have to. You don't have to show love. But most of them were children. Before we know Christ, we love our parents. Before we come to Christ, we do a bunch of different things. But Jesus says, if you don't stop doing those things, if there's no change in your life, then you're not worthy. But what does being worthy have to do with anything? If you've ever seen a Christian who tried Christianity out for a while and fell away, what often happens is they become Christian and they do the Christian thing, but they try to find something else. There's always that longing for something else. Or maybe they did something before they were a Christian and they didn't want to think that that was something that was bad, so they kept doing it. And as more people told them they shouldn't be doing it, as more people told them, man, maybe you should stop doing this or start doing this, they started to fall away. Because there was no real change. You see, especially in this time, family was important. Family was everything. And for a son to say he does not love his father as much as he loves God would have been a strong statement. You think that would have been, very loving of the son, but that was very disrespectful. But Jesus says, if this is what you're doing, you're not even understanding what I'm saying yet. And why? Because there must be change. We must understand the point of who Jesus is and the ministry that he brought. If you're still doing the same things that you were before you were a Christian, I hit on this last week, there's been no change. And honestly, if the cross wasn't what it was, there would be no point of it. But Jesus is getting ready to send his disciples out, and he thought this was one of the most important things that he could teach them. Is the cross must cause change. So starting in verse 36, and a person's enemy will be those of his own household. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. All of these things show a reluctancy to change. A reluctancy to follow. But Jesus says the whole point of who I am and what I'm doing is so that your life does not have to be the same. It doesn't have to be the same as it was. You're able to change. I have the power, I have the strength, and I have the glory to change you from who you were to who you are. But see, we go back to the very first part of that. I did not come to bring peace, but I came with a sword. You see, if you start preaching universalism, the rest of this doesn't really mean anything. Because God's going to save you whether you're good or bad. But Jesus makes a distinction. He says, to follow me, there must be a change in who you were. To be a follower of me, you cannot stay the same. And that's what he means by separation in a family. I think it's very interesting that he uses family as an illustration because it's not easy, something easily you can break yourself apart from. You grew up with your family, you love your family. But he says if there's no change in your interaction to them or with them, you don't truly understand me. You don't truly love him. Because you see, if you love him and you understand who he is, then things must change. Not they must, they will. And if they don't, then it shows that there's a problem. You can take any example you want. But if there's a thing in your life that you were doing before you understood the meaning of the cross, which we'll get into next week, that changes this whole dichotomy. But you can think of that one thing that you were struggling with before you became a Christian. And as you started to become a Christian, you started to understand the freedom that comes in Christ. There was that one or maybe two things that you didn't want to leave behind. You wanted to kind of, keep dragging in. And Jesus said, you can't do that. You've got to change. And there comes a moment when you have to decide, is that thing greater than what you're walking to? Is that life that you're living worth keeping on to, but giving up the life that Jesus gives? Or, for his sake, will you lose your life? Everything that you've done, everything that you know is wrong, everything that's over here, will you lose that life? So for Christ's sake, you will find it. You see, Christ gives us life. But it's a different life than what we had. Some of you might be still in that middle part where you want some of that old life and you want to bring it into this new life that Jesus offers, but he says you have to make a decision. There has to come a time where you say, no longer is that old life the life I'm living, but I want to step into this new life that you are giving to me. These words, you are not worthy, or you are worthy, they're strong words, and usually Jesus doesn't say that because we're all unworthy. But what he's talking about is if you're still in that old life, you can't grasp this new life. If you're still saying, no, Jesus, I want this stuff, and I'm not coming unless I can bring it with me, he says you don't understand what the new life is all about. So the cross in our relationship with God has to cause change. And if it doesn't, as Jesus says, we can't get that new life. If we're not willing to lose our life, some of our family, some of our friends, some of our activities, some of the things we do, some of the things we love to do, if we're not willing to lose absolutely every bit of it just to gain this new life, Jesus says, you don't understand the power. You don't understand the glory of it. So what I want you guys to think about this week, as you leave here, as you go home, as you interact with your family, think about what Jesus means to you in your life. Are there still those things that you don't want to give up? That they're easy to cling on to, that they're easy to see and hold on to? Or are you going to surrender? You say, look, Jesus, you've given me this life. And what I'm going to do is leave it all behind so that I can get it. So that I can join you in life. True life. Not this fake stuff that we want to hold on to. Not this fake, the pleasures or the joy that we find over here. But God, that we want the true. We want the true relationship. We want the true life that you give. Not just as some random thing over here. It's a tough decision. It's hard to think about. It's honestly something you might have struggled with for a while, but this week I want you guys to meditate on it. Anytime you get some silent time, maybe you're in the car or driving somewhere, think about it. Is there anything in your life that maybe Jesus is kind of looking at and being like, are you sure? Is that the thing you want to hold on to? Is getting my life worth giving up that? Or are you so hung on to this old life that you're not willing to lay it down to receive the new life that Christ has given us? That's what I want to close with, and that's what I want to challenge you guys to think on this week. If you guys want to stand, we will close with a word of prayer, and then we're going to have a song of invitation, where you're more than welcome to think about the sacrifice that God gave and the relationship with. Let's pray.